Today we're going to learn how to play against the King's Gambit.
Oh my gosh, this is actually really cool. I'm looking forward to that. I have my pet opening, and I'm very curious because I think it has been debunked quite
Mhm.
easily. So we will see if we will talk about that. Okay, let's dive into this. King's
Yeah.
Gambit, perfect.
So King's Gambit starts with e4, e5, and f4. And it's one of the oldest documented openings, I would say, and it has been so popular throughout history. And of course, it lost some of its popularity in the recent years due to these engine analyses, but still, it's been played by many strong players, especially Nepo, Magnus, have played it quite a bit, and it's produced a lot of really brilliant historic games as well. But in this lesson, we learn how to play against it. So, do you ever face it as black?
I do often enough. It's like it's not an opening which is like it's never happening. This is happening more often than not, and actually on my level, like as a good club player, this is a weapon to absolutely reckon with.
Yeah, actually, for me as well, it's mostly when I play
Oh,
in at my club, and when I was preparing for my club championship, this was played in one of my decisive rounds. So I'll also show it as one of
true.
the games. So the idea is that white gives up a pawn early, and they hope to divert the attention of the black pawn and then to take over the center, get really quick piece development, and start to get an attack going. So the most popular move is to accept the pawn, and we will learn how to do this correctly and how to avoid getting into too much trouble here.
Hmm.
But there's some interesting alternative, like for example, this one, I think it's called the Falk Beer Counter Gambit, and many other lines exist as well. But we'll focus on this one of how to capture that pawn. So now White's main moves are knight f3 and bishop c4. Um, and some sidelines exist too, but to most of these, our reaction will be queen to h4. That's usually Black's response. But let's still see some examples of a sideline. For example, d4. Looks natural to take over the center, but already White gets into some trouble after queen to h4. And of course, it's good to know the trick that something like g3 usually will not work because of this g2 check. So that's a good tactic to know. And you'll make a new queen. But I'm sure that every King's Gambit player is not going to fall for that, and
That's
they
the
kind
problem,
of
yeah.
know what they're going for here. But in this case, they would have to then move the king somewhere like e2, in which case we want to take over the center really quickly with d5 and then bishop to g4. And things like this, for example, are very pleasant positions. And queen to e1, sometimes white will offer this queen in case their king is somewhere out in the center, in which case you usually don't want to trade it. And I just continue the line with king d3 check just because, you don't see such a check very often. And yeah, anyways, it leads to quite pleasant positions. But that's something like a d4 sideline, which I would say most King's Gambit players will not play, but still, you never know which sideline somebody might choose. Um, and another one that I would just quickly mention is knight to c3. And here, once again, you would go for this queen to h4 check, and not too many options, king e2. And now, similarly to the previous line I showed you, d5 is very often the main move because you want to open up the bishop, you want to start to get things going in the center once the opponent's king is there. And now white taking with the pawn, for example, is already dangerous because the bishop comes out, another bishop can come out, and now you're not even down material, but you're already playing with initiative. So usually this is not what white ends up going for and wants out of the opening. But the reason why I did want to show this line is because there's some danger involved here with knight takes d5, because it does threaten to take on c7, and we're actually going to sacrifice that. So bishop to g4, knight f3 is the only defense, and now knight to c6. This is the best move. If you don't like this top line, of course, you can play a simpler alternative that is slightly worse, like bishop to d6. But knight c6 is really best, and it sacrifices this rook on a8. And after knight to e5,
Oh, no
black has,
check.
yeah, black has a pretty nice tactical threat. What do you think it is?
That's interesting. Yeah, I was like almost certain you would play knight d4 check.
Yeah, but then king goes to d3, and the
Uh-huh.
thing is, we kind of want the king to stay here
I
for this
see.
threat.
That is super interesting. So I didn't. Now I see it. It took me a little bit. So we can just take on f3, and after taking back, we can take again on f3, and after
Yeah.
taking back, we can give a check on h5 with the queen and take the queen because our king is not on e8 anymore. How funny is that? I like
Yeah,
that.
exactly. So that's the threat here, and which is why kind of the knight goes here and tries to threaten that idea. And basically, white's only defense is something like queen e1. Well, h3 also exists, in which case you just retreat and the threat is renewed again. But queen e1, in which case we would take that piece,
Whoa.
and after this trade, um, play something like g5, and this is better for black. And I don't know, I'm always scared whenever I'm down material slightly, but here everything is okay because you will end up winning this knight back on a8, and
Okay.
then you'll have two really, really powerful pieces against a rook. And white is also not really developed yet, so it's not too quick past-faced game there. So
Mhm.
that's why these are sidelines and they're not really what white mainly plays. So that was the knight c3 line. So we'll then look at the bishop to c4 and the knight f3 line. Let's start with bishop c4. So the second main line. And in this case, they're in a lot of cases they want to attack on f7. They're kind of making d5 a bit more difficult. So we instead develop with knight to c6. Now, once again, white can go about it in a few ways. I would say one of the dangerous ones is d4, just because these pawns look really good in the center and it looks threatening.
Mhm.
But there's nothing to be scared of now that if you look into a bit how to play against the King's Gambit, at first it looks scary, like from a practical perspective, but once you kind of know what you're doing, it actually starts looking scary for white at some points because they're also really opening up their king and overextending sometimes.
I see.
So knight to f6 is the move. This, I don't know about you, it reminds me of the two knights tango when both of them are like
Yeah.
getting attacked by the pawns all the time. But in this case, it's totally okay. So if even if they do get attacked, then the important move to know is d5, and the knight ends up
Mm.
going to e4 next.
Very nice.
And some other lines like knight c3, if they defended, then you just keep developing with bishop to b4, make a pin, and yeah. And in this case, there's even a nice move like f3 just to open up the king a little bit more and then play d5. So black is slightly better, just has some more initiative, and the white king is a little bit more open than usual.
Hmm.
So that's usually how it goes. You want to try to take over the initiative if there's a chance to do that. And the main move, though, after knight to c6 is knight to f3. So I would think that most King's Gambit players will play it with kind of knowing the first few moves of their line, and most likely they'll play some of the main lines because usually those ones are the most dangerous. And after this move, the move that we often play in the King's Gambit is g5. And what that does is, of course, it defends the f4 pawn. It also threatens g4 in some cases. And, well, if you ever want, you also just have that nice bishop to g7 development. So it's kind of has a lot of purposes. Now, in once again the King's Gambit, white sometimes will attack
Challenge this
that
pawn.
pawn
Yeah.
chain, yeah, with their h4 move. And in this case, we almost always just push g4. And after knight e5, thankfully there's knight to e5, protecting both f7 and attacking the bishop. And now the threat is h6 to win the knight. And white can, of course, sacrifice, but it's not the best.
Oh, so d4 is not really working. Interesting.
Yeah, because the bishop is attacked as well. So black is all safe here, I would say.
Ah.
And if they, let's say, castle, then you calmly develop with the bishop to g7, and you can put the knight on e7, play h6, well, maybe play h6 first if you were worried about the pawn, and then something like d5 if the time is right. So this is usually how these lines go, but I would say just knowing a few of these white's alternatives is useful because you don't want to play a move that accidentally falls for some tactic or some trap. But in this case, there aren't too many of them if you just pursue some of the normal development. So let's say d4, you develop the bishop onto g7, and maybe now in this case, there's uh, there's already no knight e5. So for example, if white plays h4, now you sort of think back, okay, previously I played g4, knight came here, and then I played knight e5. Here it doesn't exist. So in this case, I wouldn't play g4 and I would play, let's say, h6. So I put too many arrows because I like arrows, but it's
And
basically normal development after
the
that.
bishop
There's just some
is
options.
the bishop is there to save the rook exchange, and okay, yeah, that's an important rule to remember, but I think that's possible.
Yeah. Um, Plus, yeah, some of these I always don't like exactly like memorization of some lines, but more memorizing these ideas
Yeah.
and then seeing if they apply in your specific situation because you never know what exactly the position will be. So for example, if c3 to protect that pawn, then d6, and then this h6 move I mentioned, and the rest of white's moves can vary, and black's plans will really depend on that. Let's say they can undermine our pawn chain with g3 or h4, in which case you would try to think in that direction, or you would try to, let's say, make use of these weak squares if they open up. They can also attack with queen to b3. They can attack this pawn, in which case you would defend it with the queen. So basically, you would react accordingly to what the opponent does. And if they don't do anything special, then you continue the development. So it's kind of like that. And it would be a lot to go through each and every single line from now. But I do think that for the King's Gambit, the most important is this first initial stage to not get caught for any traps, to just be confident in your own setup. And from there, it's a game and you enjoy it as black in this case, or as both sides. It's usually a really interesting and double-edged battle. So that was bishop c4, and we'll get to the main line now with knight f3. But do you have any questions?
No, that's perfect. You explained it very well. Thank you.
Okay, so now we'll do the main line then, which is knight f3. And so the thing is, here, the main response that
I think
usually,
I'm sorry, I have a question.
yeah,
I'm so sorry. So when we go back to bishop c4, did
yeah.
we talk about why queen h4 is not really working here?
No, we didn't talk about it, but queen h4 is certainly like one of the moves. And the thing here is that the king is just fine with king to f1,
Exactly, yeah.
and before that the king wasn't really fine.
Yeah, but
Like,
because
it was only two.
the bishop moves to c4 and out of a sudden the king moves to f1. I've seen this many, many times. Yeah, and out of a sudden your queen is just like a bit lost, feels a little lost. But I think it is, yeah, it is, it's a variation, but there are better ones. The ones you explained are much better.
Yeah, and now knight f3 comes with a tempo, and you kind of didn't achieve a lot with the
Yeah.
check. Of course, it's still fine, and even I think some Immortal game started like that, one of Anderson's games, but it was, he won it as white. But it's it is kind of what white wants in some of these cases to just get a tempo on the queen and then right away start something in the
Yeah.
center, and the king is okay on f1. Of course, nothing is super wrong with playing queen h4. You're not going to lose immediately. But yeah, it's just
Hmm.
basically if you want to take over the initiative for black, you kind of try a few other ways.
Perfect. Now, I just
That was
wanted
a really
to,
good question,
yeah, I
though.
wanted to point this out because this was often on my mind since you also mentioned it. Okay, cool. Now,
Yeah.
knight f3. Why can we not play our queen to h4 now and give it a nice check?
Yeah, very good question. So now we cannot do it anymore, which is unfortunate, but that's okay because there's some other lines. So usually the main line is g5. And that's the most popular continuation for black. And it leads to lots of theory after h4, g4, knight e5, and and so on. And even though these lines are pretty good as well, and you can definitely learn them if you wish, but I kind of in this lesson I wanted to do a slightly less popular line, which is knight to f6. And in my
Oh.
opinion, going a bit more off track is against experienced Gambit players is kind of nicer. You feel better because you kind of have the same amount of experience in this line as they do, maybe a little less, but it's not is somebody who plays a Gambit all the time. They will know the main lines,
Yeah.
they'll have experience. So even if you memorize it, they'll just feel the position slightly more. So I like if we can go for a slightly less popular line, I would do it. And knight f6 is one of such lines. Of course, the opponent might know it as well, but it's just probably it's something they deal with less often. So first of all, that attacks the e4 pawn, so white has to figure out what to do there. Some options are, let's go with the less dangerous options like d3, let's say. Then you go for the center right away with d5, and this looks very pleasant. And now the best move is bishop f4, after which you can, let's say, choose to take the pawn. You can choose to not take the pawn, but I would prefer to take one. And if e5, then you play knight to h5, and now you defend that pawn on
Ooh.
f4.
But
So
there's no real way to get that knight? No, really not.
we will see that this knight comes there very, very often in these lines if
Uh-huh.
white ever pushes, and it just stays there, and it's actually not even a bad piece. It's doing quite a bit.
Hmm.
So that's d3, not super dangerous, but maybe can be played to defend the pawn. Maybe knight c3 can also be played to defend the pawn, in which case, once again, if you have the opportunity to strike with d5, we will do it. And once again, on e5, basically always the knight goes here, and then the other knight comes out to c6, and position looks pretty solid and pretty good with an extra pawn. Later, g5 and bishop e6 are some moves. And if they take on d5, then we take back. And let's say if the knight takes, then just development. I wouldn't hold on to this pawn like right away because first of all, right now they cannot take it due to queen to e4. So, later you play
Huh.
g5 to keep that pawn and basically have a nice time, I would say, with an extra pawn with not too many threats. So those are some variations. Of course, there's more, and they will be in the file as well. But now let's look at the main line here, which is e5, which I think most King's Gambit players will
Yeah,
play.
for sure. Looks
So
tempting.
yeah, I mean, you already know where the knight is going.
Yes, h5.
Exactly. And it looks odd here, but actually it does have a very important role of protecting f4, and it ends up being quite useful sometimes. So it's not completely a bad piece at all. And okay, if ever, I guess if you really need it to go somewhere, maybe g5 is a really normal move, and then you'll have a retreating square to g7, in some really worst case
Hmm.
scenario, you can have that square.
Can we quickly
But
take one
yeah,
route already and just look at the knight to d4, which is probably not the main
okay,
line, but just for
sure.
us to see what will happen or what can
Knight
happen.
d4.
So
I would say
obviously
queen
our knight
h4
is,
happens.
of course, yeah, because the knight takes away that spot. Yeah, perfect. That'll do.
Hmm.
Nice.
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, that's what this knight here is usually doing, and it stays there. So usually what white does now is to push d4, and they do so to take the center to attack f4. But we usually, when we give that center to the opponent, we want to strike it back a little bit with something like d6. So this is a good move here. You can also play d5, but I kind of like putting the pressure onto the e5 pawn more with d6. And since this is a short lesson, I'll guess we'll only go over some of the really critical lines with queen to e2. And these are critical because there's already some threads going on. But many other lines exist here. Maybe just to mention, like bishop to c4, for example. in which case you can keep developing with the knight to c6 and, and then see as it goes which threats white is making, whether they're dangerous, whether to defend against it, and, maybe if you want to change the structure a bit to your advantage if they developed a bishop here, so, things like that. So of course white can do other things too, but I would say most people might find themselves playing this queen to e2 move, and it's kind of the most forcing and dangerous one.
Yeah, it looks a bit dangerous, honestly. Yeah.
I don't think you would guess what move we play as black here. Maybe you would,
I
but it
would,
looked super dangerous to me.
yeah, I would have played. Okay, then I wouldn't have known. I would have played d5, of course.
Hmm. So
But
if you want to play d5, you should play it on the last move instead of d6, let's say.
okay. So what could it be? That's so interesting.
It's the opposite of d5.
The opposite of d5.
If
What
I
is
can
the
call it that way,
opposite of
yeah.
d5? It's
Well, d5, you're
taking.
closing the position. You're trying to not open up the e
Yeah.
file. So
So
the
we're
opposite of
so
that.
we're taking or what?
Yeah, we're taking on e5.
Okay, the queen
When
comes to
when I first
e7.
saw this position, it looked really, really scary.
Yeah.
But the deeper you look into these King's Gambit lines, the more you realize that white actually also has many, many problems to solve, if not
Yeah.
more than black, if black also knows what they're doing. So now the knight taking is the main line, but pawn taking is not so good because of bishop to g4, and black, I would say, is even close to winning already because white's pieces
Sweet.
are not coordinated at all and they're not doing anything. Maybe queen h4 later if you really want to take and play queen h4, but knight c6 probably and just really good play. And if queen to e5 instead, of course, no choice. We have to trade the queens with queen e7. But in such cases, you don't mind trading queens. You're up a pawn, and if you get out of trouble, then great.
And psychologically, probably
Mhm.
a king's gambit is still considered like an attacking player, right? So if
Yeah,
if
that's true.
the if the queen, which is the toy of the white player, if the toys are taken away, they will
They're
cry.
not gonna like it.
No.
Exactly. So knight e5 is something that is more natural, and this is the position that looks scary.
Yeah.
And this is actually what I ended up like preparing for that club championship game that I told you about. And before that, I really looked into this line because if you make one wrong move, you might like you lose a rook or something like that
Yeah.
on h8.
Or more.
But the thing is, we're going to purposely sometimes lose that rook. So it's okay. So now that the knight left, we can do our queen to h4 check with you know with even more power. So now usually what white does is g3, and that's what has been played in every game. The computer's best move is king to d1, but I looked at the online database. It hasn't been played. Maybe it's been played, in some other places. I'm sure people have played it before, but it's just not what white
Not
usually
very
does.
human.
Yeah, it's not very human, but to that you can respond with bishop to e7, and if the knight retreats, queen g4, pretty unclear, but I would say everything is more or less fine.
Okay.
No huge threat going on right away. So king d1 is the computer likes it, but I would say a lot of humans wouldn't. So they play g3. Why? Because you want to attack the queen, and also you see these threats, and you think, well,
Absolutely.
I'm doing great with like it's actually black who has to worry. But we actually don't do, we're not too concerned about it. We take with the knight on g3. So
Wow.
that knight ended up being useful there on h5. So of course, on any discovered checks, you are able to take the queen on e2. That is good. Maybe queen f2 is also a little bit tricky, but it doesn't work due to bishop to e7, and now the knight will be free to move on the next turn to take anything that it wants. So that doesn't work, and usually h takes g3 is the move. Once again, attack on the queen plus discovered attacks going on with the knight. Queen takes on h1. This may look crazy,
It
but
does.
to true King's Gambit fans, I would say this is where their theory will start. This is finally, that position um, that you'll want to start playing.
Okay.
And the thing here, of course, knight to g6 looks like a very normal discovered check, but that is actually a mistake. And this is what happened in my decisive game in my club championship, where the opponent was an avid King's Gambit player, but even he confused the lines because he didn't expect some of this, and he played the natural but wrong move, knight to g6. So I played bishop to e6. The knight took here, and now knight c6. And of course, I didn't know exactly the evaluation or the best moves from now on, but it basically from now on it is winning for black because there's um, there's just a full incoming attack. There's a really good development, and black doesn't really have any problems. And right now it's only a piece for two pawns, but this piece is never coming out, and you get take any pawn you want on d4, on g3. You have so many pawns also to take if you would like more, but it's really mainly about the white's king as well. So my game ended with c3, takes, and then queen h4, and that's basically both attacks this bishop and threatens g2, so there was nothing left to do, and my opponent resigned in 14 moves.
Wow, a
But
miniature
of course,
game.
that's more on the opponent's end for sure.
Sure.
To that he kind of confused the move order with knight to g6. But I think to a person who sees this position for the first time, that's kind of just the move you play because
100%, yeah.
that looks exactly like what you should be doing if you had just sacrificed your own rook on h1. But maybe some players will know bishop to f4 is the main move, and this is the correct one. And now it might look scary, but we don't do anything on the e-file. We play bishop to d6.
Oof.
So that's just something to know. Now, once again, knight g6, not such a great move because of bishop e6. And after takes, knight c6, this is pretty good. So
Unbelievable.
all
Knight
good
c3.
there. And instead, white should play knight c3. Finally, we'll go away with the castle. White castle is long, and at this point, black is up an exchange and a pawn. So some tactics might still exist, and knowing a little bit more maybe should be enough to get you out of trouble. But already, I mean, I like having that extra material. Maybe some players would prefer to be on the other side with the compensation, trying to have something to prove. But I would say if you know even just a few more moves, it should be enough to not lose or anything, or to know all of white's tricks. Now the best move is bishop to h3.
That's what I thought, yeah.
And it's important to know this one as well, because otherwise you might get a little bit stuck with your development, or maybe fall for some tactic. And now white's only move for equality is knight to f7. Also not something you would play every day, but basically it's one of white's tactical ideas. So now we take on f4 with check, and they take back. And now there's three moves that kind of keep it equal, which is bishop takes f1, knight d7, knight c6. You can choose whichever one you like as long as the
Whoa.
tactics are working out.
We're
But the
not
thing is
taking
to
the
not,
knight.
yeah, to not take the knight because of bishop to
Oh, the
c4.
pain.
Yeah, and that's unfortunate.
Wow.
And if king takes, then also a problem with queen to h5. And sure, the king can go somewhere.
That is, yeah, that's a good call. My goodness.
Yeah, so just important to not do that, but to play one of the three moves. Maybe, for example, bishop to f1 and then remove the queen. In some of these lines, white can gain back the exchange with some knight g5, queen e6, and knight f7, let's say. But also, it's a game that can still be played. That there's a lot to do. Knight c6 probably next to attack on d4. and the game goes on. And once again, you can also look into one of these other moves. But already, I think this is quite deep, but it's still a forcing line that if the opponent goes for it, you kind of don't have a choice, which is why even though it's like move 14, it's just good to know to make sure you're safe. But other than that, of course, most of the lines will diverge at some point, and your opponent will not know everything. You will not know every single alternative, and that's what makes the game fun, and that's why it's one of these exciting openings that has a lot of attacking lines and that you can play for both sides. But overall, I would say it's a very fun and complicated opening, and hopefully now you'll feel more confident in how to fight against the King's Gambit and to not be scared to accept it.
This is exactly the lesson I wanted to have. It was really insightful, and looking forward to try it out soon enough, because my Falkbier counter Gambit, it has its flaws. It has too many flaws. And I remember a game where I played it and I got crushed in also like 12 moves because I made one wrong move. It was kind of like a situation where I could take the knight or not.
Mhm.
And I made the wrong move, and then the game was over. So it's good to have a nice alternative, check some of the moves, and be prepared. Thank you, Svitlana.